Hello and welcome back to the Hibs Observer. I'm Liam Bryce here as always with Patrick McPartlin, who joined me for what's a break from regular programming, and that it's not our usual morning briefing, but we've gone for the late afternoon slot this week. But still, obviously, plenty to discuss in terms of all things Hibernian. Just moving on from another victory for Hibs at the weekend there. But before we get into that, can I just direct your attention to our kind of Black Friday offer, which is still running at the moment. Gives you a year's access to all our Hibs content for just price of £10, and that's as opposed to the normal price of $34.99. And as I said, for that you get a full year's worth of content. So that includes, these delightful videos. It's exclusive interviews, features, tactical analysis, and comprehensive match preview and reaction, latest news, and everything else in between, and basically everything you can imagine as it relates to Hibs. If we can take a couple of steps back, though, and just maybe take a wee look back at the weekend there. Hibs prevailing 2-1 winners over Dundee at Dens Park. It was the first time this season that Hibs have won 2 Premiership matches in a row. Lifted them into the top 6 and put everybody in a kind of, in terms of Hibs fans, in a kind of positive frame of mind ahead of, got Aberdeen coming to Easter Road at the weekend. But then after that, it's life on the road for certainly a few weeks thereafter. Some really kind of difficult and interesting games in there. So I think it was obviously important for Hibs, Patrick, to just kind of kick off this run with a positive result and performance.
Yeah, definitely. I think, whenever you've got an international break that comes right after not just a victory, but a kind of hard-fought victory, an ugly win, if you like the victory against Kilmarnock was, there's always a little bit of a kind of maybe not fear, maybe that's a bit strong, but there is that little bit of doubt, like, is the break going to do them good? Is it going to actually sort of detract? Is it going to take away that consistency? But I think there was a lot to like about the victory at Dundee. I think it's a place that Hibs have gone recently and haven't had the best of luck or the best of results either. Quite a few draws, a few defeats in there as well. I think when you look at how well Tony Docherty's had Dundee playing at home so far this season as well, I don't think many teams will get results at Dens Park this season. I think it's going to get a bit of a reputation as a tough place to go. But I think the fact that Hibs not only managed to hold on to a lead but also survive the sending off of Lewis Miller and a bit of an onslaught as well. I think all of that not only really good for morale ahead of, as you say, like quite a difficult festive period coming up, but I think just it shows that the team is progressing under Nick Montgomery, that these things do take time, but you are seeing the fruits of all that hard work on the training ground. Obviously, the international break, there were just a couple of days off for players who weren't away with national teams, and then it was back to it on the training ground. And I think we probably saw at Dens Park at the weekend that these things are working. It's not just holding on to a lead. It's surviving the red card. It's players like Jair Tavares really sort of coming onto a game. Josh Campbell continuing to play well. A lot to like about it. And certainly a positive result ahead of what could be a difficult test on Sunday against an Aberdeen side who I think will probably be looking to turn around their own league form a little bit. Given that they've been a little bit unfortunate on the domestic front so far this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think looking at it beforehand, I kind of pegged it as one that was really potentially tricky, obviously for a number of reasons. You've touched on how Dundee have been a bit of a surprise package this season. They've been going really well. They look, you can just tell they're a well-organised side. They've got a bit of quality in there as well. I think before Hibs went up to Dens, they rolled over the top of St Mirren, which not a lot of teams have done up until now. So it was as well, coming off the back of the international break, kind of guys who have been away to kind of far-flung corners of the world. Possibly some, kind of exotic locations, to then going up the road to Dens Park in the middle of November, absolutely freezing.
Not an exotic location, Liam.
Well, no, I suppose it depends on your personal taste, doesn't it? but it was one of those kind of really difficult, tricky games coming off a break. It looked as though it was kind of potential for a slip up. But I thought Hibs dealt with it really well in general. Started well, obviously the goal sort of speaks for itself. It's brilliant from Jared Tavares basically starting and finishing the move. I thought Dundee had a spell kind of sort of midway through the first half, I felt, but apart from that, I felt Hibs had sort of good control throughout. Some really kind of impressive. I think there were some more impressive individual performances rather than it being a complete collective team performance. It was one of those days where you just need to go and get a result. And I think they did enough to do that. I think what was maybe especially heartening is obviously Lewis Miller does get sent off. Hibs do have a 2-goal cushion, but it wasn't until kind of Dundee really sort of pulled out the kitchen sink in the last, in the real closing stages that it began to feel a wee bit uncomfortable. I felt Hibs managed it quite well in general until that point where it would have been easy to kind of maybe let some of the kind of previous anxieties creep in. I thought it was largely controlled.
Yeah.
And just showed that just showed a bit of guts, I think, as well to get that over the line. Because I mean, it's the thing with this team has been that everybody knows that they can play. Everybody knows there's good individuals in there, but there was that kind of question mark hanging over them at times because that Leeds had been thrown away. There was the way that the semi-final at Hampden was lost in the manner of that. So I think it was as much as Kilmarnock, grinding out a 1-0 win at home would have been good psychologically. I think that would there last weekend does even more, just because of the circumstances and knowing that you can get it done in difficult circumstances, as I say. Maybe just coming back, I think the man everybody's been talking about has been Jared Tavares, who he just seems to be going from strength to strength at the moment, doesn't he?
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's quite funny. I was going through some of my old tweets from last year when he was getting kind of bit part appearances, maybe coming on as a sub for the last 10 minutes. He actually played, I think it was a mid-season friendly, so it was during the World Cup break. I think he came on against Middlesbrough at Easter Road, and I think that was the first time that I sort of saw from him, I thought, actually, there is a player in here. This isn't just a case of, I think a lot of fans suspected that, Hibs went to go and watch Benfica's academy teams playing and basically picked the wrong player when you look at how well Duke's doing at Aberdeen. Obviously there was a reason for earmarking this player as being somebody who could come and contribute. And, I think it's so interesting when you look at this Hibs team and you look at what the coaching staff have got out of the team, not just collectively, but I think from individuals as well. There was a fantastic bit in that inside training podcast with Sergio Raimundo, where he talked about players thinking that they're given 100%, but actually that's only 60%, and that everyone's got a bit more to give. And I think that you're kind of seeing that in the team, not just from individuals but collectively. And we're starting to see it a bit more. I think we saw it at Dundee. We certainly saw it against Kilmarnock that players are buying. I mean, the players are saying this, that they're buying into Montgomery and his coaching staff's methods, and I think we're starting to see that starting to see evidence of that. But I think, the transformation in Jair has been something to behold, and I think it just further backs up that feeling that you can't treat every player the same way. That there are some players who need an arm around the shoulder and a quiet word in the ear. There are some that respond best to getting the hairdryer treatment in front of their teammates. Everyone's different, and it comes down to the individual. One of the things that's really stuck with me has been Montgomery's kind of approach of. I mean, we knew when he came in. When he came in, the first thing he said was he was all about person first, player second, and I think that's enabled them to get the most out of Jair. I think it's enabled them to get more out of Rocky Bashiri as well. It's enabled them to get good performances out of the youngsters. They've been trusting academy players, 16, 17-year-olds to come on in big games. You've got Rory Whittaker playing against Celtic and Rangers in the space of a week. You've got Josh Landers coming on. in a National Cup semi-final at Hampden. It's it's all about how you interact with the players, how you sort of get the best out of them, and what works for them. And it's taken time to learn what works best for every player, and it isn't going to be the same. It's not going to be the same for everyone. There are some players who, I think Lewis Miller's a good example. Here's a big brash Australian who's come over from his homeland for the first time. Said this before, we spoke to him in Portugal not long after he joined up, and it was just the confidence that he exuded in that interview, which was just, it was essentially, I'm going to come to Scotland, I'm going to rip it up, I'm going to show what I'm all about. A bit of a kind of stereotypical brash Aussie kind of approach. And obviously his first season didn't really go to plan, but, you look at this season, he's turned into, probably one of the first names on the team sheet for Hibs, and not just because there's not a great deal of alternative options in the right back area, but just, he's improving all the time as well. Montgomery's getting, the best out of him. He's contributing with goals. He's had a couple of assists. He's got his international debut as well. And I think it bodes really well for the future. It certainly bodes well for the likes of, I think, Harry McCurdy, who's still to come back. Maybe Jake Doyle-Hayes as well. That you've got a coaching staff who, care about the player as a human as well as a player. And it's just being able to coax that a bit more out of them, and just knowing what makes them tick, what works for certain players. And I think, you mentioned Jair, and I think we've seen that more so with him than with anybody else. And I think you listen to what he was saying in his interview, talking about never giving up, and thinking I've come from my homeland, I've left my family, my friends, I've left however many years it was at Benfica. I think it was into the double figures. He's sort of put his faith in, the previous management to come over and sort of show what he can do, and he's not had that chance, and he's not given up. He's kept on plugging away, even though, as he says, it was mentally devastating. So I think, you look at his turnaround, and it's even more impressive given, what he's been speaking candidly about it in the media in the past couple of weeks, just saying how much it's affected him. When, there were people last season who just thought, oh, he's got an attitude problem or he's not good enough. So, it goes to show that we don't really know always what's going on behind closed doors, or what's going on at the training centre. But I think Jair deserves credit for the way he's turned things around, for how he's kind of bounced back. And I think the coaching staff probably deserve, just as much credit for managing to bring that out of him, and for, not expecting the world from him straight away, but from kind of coaxing it out of him, giving him time to come into the team, giving him time to sort of almost make mistakes and get up to speed with how they play. Because then what you're getting from him is you're getting the goal against Ross County before the international break. You're getting, not just the goal against Dundee, but starting the move. And, just an all-round, a really impressive performance from him in Dundee. And I think there's probably more to come from him. And I think, he will start showing just why we're so keen to sign him on such a long-term deal.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the not expecting the world from him straight away, because it has been, there has been a real turnaround, obviously, going from being pretty much as far out of the picture as it's possible to be without leaving the club, to now starting, I think, maybe 5-6 games in a row. It's still some turnaround, but you can see that he's still got a way to go. There's been some really good performances there. He's done some really good things, but then you can see that he's within that. It's not been, I don't want to overblow it and say that it's been entirely flawless. You can see that there are still some things that he's looking to improve on. I think even Montgomery said that himself after the Dundee game. There was a few times where he gets into the final third, and I think the phrase he used is that he gets a bit too excited, and maybe it's the kind of adrenaline rush of blood to the head, making the right decision at the right time. So he's being. Sorry?
I'm the same at 5 sides. I know what you mean.
Yeah, I know. It plagues us at all levels. It really does. Go to pieces in front of goal. He's being allowed to, kind of to develop as he's going along, which I think is important. I don't think there'll be, the things that he can still improve on. Obviously, it'll be getting looked at. But if he gives, I don't think he's the type he's going to get hammered for occasionally will give the ball away. Occasionally what he tries won't come off. And I think you can just see, you can see that he is just adding bits and pieces to his game as well. He kind of likes that move that he made for the first goal. He clearly, he's obviously probably been instructed to it, but he likes to make that. But there's been a few times this season where I think, especially against Kilmarnock, I think it kind of happened maybe 2 or 3 times where the ball gets played into his feet, where he's got his back to goal, and somebody would not necessarily fouling him, but they would just kind of throw him out of the way, almost come through the back, take the ball. Yeah, just brush him, because he's not a big powerhouse type player. He's quite slight, but his frame and that kind of wiriness about him, the agility, that can be an advantage as well. You probably don't want to. I don't know if you want to mess with that too much, but there's obviously there's the things that he's adding. It was just the way he kind of used his body for that goal. To kind of keep, it was Dundee's Boateng who'd come through the back, just to kind of, you don't need to be massively strong, but if you can, just use your body in the right way, it allowed him to turn. It's just adding wee kind of things like that that obviously show that he's adjusting to what the Scottish Premiership demands of you, because I think there's probably, there's been guys who have played a lot more senior football than Jair who have come to this league and found it hard going physically. So I think he deserves that time to acclimatise to it, because it's not just something you can you can get used to overnight. He does need a kind of extended sort of bit of time to kind of really fully adapt. But I think the signs so far are very positive in that regard. Obviously he's cropping up with big contributions now. He's a threat. He works hard as well. I don't think that should be overlooked either. Just in terms of adapting as well, I don't think we can talk about that without talking about Rocky Bashiri at the moment. He's another one he's kind of growing into his role in the team. Obviously, he's still playing centre back, but it's a kind of slightly different thing that he's been asked to do, playing on the left of that central defensive pair, and he's obviously been asked to do a lot more on the ball. But he kind of went under the radar, a lot of people have been saying in recent weeks. But I think, for maybe a centre-back, you don't necessarily want your centre-back to be the main talking point from games, really, do you? Because then it kind of, when centre-backs start becoming the centre of attention, a lot of the time it tends to be because they've made mistakes. You kind of want your centre-backs to be as low-key as possible. But, I mean, it's only right to give him credit, because I think everybody can see, just his improvement, mainly in how comfortable he seems to be when Hibs are in possession. Obviously, we did the piece earlier in the week, looking at how he's kind of evolved in that sense, and the kind of obviously the standout numbers were that he completed more forward passes against Dundee than he even attempted, twice as many actually, in Montgomery's first home game against St Johnstone. So again, it's a player who's grown into what the manager is asking him to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and we're seeing that with a lot of players, and even the players who aren't maybe adjusting as quickly. Josh Campbell would be a good example. They're being given time to learn. They're sort of taking a lot on board. They're asking questions. They're working hard. The environment seems to be there for players to improve. And I think with Rocky, it's an interesting one, because not only is he being trusted to start virtually every game, but he's also playing on the left-hand side, which is maybe a bit unusual for him, because we know how kind of right-sided he is. But it goes back to that, what we've been saying before about trust, whether it's trusting 16 and 17-year-olds to come into the team and make an impact, or have an impact, make an impression, whether it's about trusting Jair to go on and show what he's capable of doing when he's had such a rough time of it. I think you look at that, sort of the faith they've got in Rocky, which again I think he maybe struggled at times, certainly when he first came in under Sean Maloney, and there was questions about his sort of fitness. And I think it turned out, I think he said in the summer that he'd been playing with a bit of an injury. He obviously hadn't played a lot of football before he came to Hibs, and was playing quite regularly. It does feel like we're now starting to see like the best of him. And I think you pointed this out in your piece, like he hasn't played a lot of senior football for a player of his age. Like, I mean, he is still young, he's still, I think, 22, 23. but he's not had a lot of senior football. He's not had a lot of minutes. And I mean, Lee Johnson did actually allude to this and say, he's in terms of his development, he's not where he should be for his age. And I think a lot of people took that the wrong way and sort of thought, is he saying that he's like mentally immature or something like that? But I think what he meant was that, for other players of that age, they would be at a certain stage in their development. But because Rocky had obviously missed so much football through injury, he hadn't quite managed to get to that stage. And I think that's fair enough. And I think that he certainly benefited last season from playing a lot more regularly than he had been previously. But certainly this season, I think, you've really seen a kind of an improvement in the way he uses the ball positionally. I think he's better. His passing is better. Going back to the Hearts game at Tynecastle, I was looking at the stats from that game, and the number of passes that he was attempting or completing to your attackers like Martin Boyle or Dylan Venta or Ellie Yuan, and that's something we've not really seen much of from Rocky so far. We hadn't up until that point. It was more just he was like your classic no nonsense centre half, get the ball, launch it into the sea if you're away at Arbroath, or hoof it up the park if you're Easter Road. But I think you look at the improvement and you think this is a player who still has a way to go, but has already shown that he takes things on board. He's willing to learn. He has improved. I think there's still quite a few Hibs fans who remain unconvinced by him, but I think if you think back to when he first came in and the way he played, the way he looked like a player who hadn't played a lot of football. He looked like a player who'd been out injured for a period of time, but now he's starting to play. He's playing regularly. He's I think formed a really good partnership with Will Fish. I think he's linking up well with Jordan Abita on that left side. And I mean, I think a lot of fans questioning at Dundee why he wasn't sort of moved to the right back slot, because that he'd be more kind of natural for that than Will Fish, which I do kind of get the logic there, but at the same time, Rocky was on a booking and would have been up against Owen Beck, very kind of tricky player, and would have been potentially another, risk of another sort of second yellow and a red, and you really don't want to be without two of your back four for a game against Aberdeen or indeed any team. But I think the fact that Rocky is getting so much more comfortable in that left-sided centre-half role, it wouldn't have made any sense to have dragged him over to the right and, sort of risk not only the result, but, his sort of disciplinary record. And, when you look at how wide the centre-halves are playing when the full-backs are pushing up, Will Fish is essentially playing right back anyway. And I think, it's just little things like that we're seeing from Montgomery and the coaching staff that, may not sort of make sense at the time. You might think, well, why has he not moved Rocky over there? Why, Paul Hanlon's come on. But, I think the coaching staff obviously recognise that, Bushiri is, doing well. He's made progress. The stats back that up. So, why would you undo that? Why would you sort of, risk sort of, he's taken however many steps forward. You don't want him to go back the ways. And I think he's the kind of player that, you see the way he celebrates when he makes a last-ditch tackle or clears something off the line. He celebrates them like goals, and that rubs some people up the wrong way. Personally, I think it's great. I love seeing that sort of thing. I love seeing, centre half just like barreling in at centre forward legally, and winning the ball, clearing it, and then just giving it the double fist pump or whatever. And I think he's a confidence player, and I think he's gaining a lot of confidence in the current system. He's been allowed to play, to develop his game. Yeah, same with Tavares. There's still things to improve on. Of course there is. But, I think he's gone from being a player who, I think a lot of people thought, Hibs should try and move on if they had the chance under, maybe under Lee Johnson. And I think Johnson even said that when he first came in, he was a player who he might have been happy to see leave, but then he became, an important player. And, that was when he stuck the £10 million price tag on his head. But you can kind of see what he was getting at. I think it's, nobody would argue with the fact that Rocky's improved this season on last season, but it's just that you can see in the way he plays in his all-round game, like he is improving. And I think on the face of it, you look at it and think Hibs have a back four or a first choice back four at the moment that has a 20 a 20-year-old in Will Fish, you've got a 23-year-old in Bushiri, and you've got a 23-year-old in Lewis Miller as well. There's not a lot of experience there.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not a lot of Scottish football experience in there either. And I think sometimes that's being overlooked. That obviously if you have Lewis Stevenson at left back, you've got Paul Hanlon in there, Chris Cadden at right back. That's there's a lot of experience there, a lot of knowledge of the Scottish game. But the way things are going at the moment, I don't see why you would change it. And I think Rocky's improvement has been a big part of that. I think Will Fish, after a sticky start to his second loan spell, is now starting to really look like the player that he was, I think, the second half of last season, when you thought, why was this guy not given a chance in the first half of the season? Just because he was looked that sort of assured. And you think this is a player who's, again, not played a lot of first team football, still relatively young, but looks like he's played there for years. Just looks really sort of comfortable, really natural. And I think that it's no secret that especially the central defence at Hibs has been in dire need of work for quite some time. We've covered this before. I think we were talking about Stevenson and Hanlon, that perhaps their longevity and their kind of ability and their sort of 7 out of 10 most weeks has probably been to the detriment of Hibs overall, and that they've now got to the stage where they are having to kind of blood in new centre backs. But you know what? Montgomery has a reputation for giving a chance to young players and getting the best out of them, and that's what we're seeing. He's doing exactly that with 3/4 of his defence at the moment, and other positions in the team as well.
Yep, absolutely. I think kind of continuity in a back four, there's a lot to be said for that as well. And I think
agreed.
Probably no coincidence that you've seen a kind of improvement in the sort of cohesion and solidity of it the more that these guys have played together consistently. Obviously, one of those will be missing this weekend. Lewis Miller, obviously, been 2 bookings. Second, somewhat harsh, I thought, but either way, he's not going to be involved against Aberdeen on Sunday. So it comes to do you, obviously Will Fish went out to right back against Dundee. Do you then stick with that against Aberdeen, or do you think Rory Whittaker will come into that right hand side of the defence? I think I know what you're going to say here, but
yeah, I think I would be very surprised if Rory Whittaker doesn't start.
You don't want to make more changes than you have to, really, Dave. Exactly,
yeah, and I think having the centre defence being as settled as it has been, and it's a really good partnership. Nothing against Paul Hanlon whatsoever, but I would be sticking with Rocky Bashiri at left centre half, Will Fish at right centre half, Jordan Abita left back. And yeah, I would bring Rory Whittaker in at right back. He's already done it. He's done it against St Mirren. I don't get the logic that you would do it against St Mirren but not do it against against Aberdeen, because when Hibs went to St Mirren were flying high in the table. Aberdeen currently are not flying high in the table. And I think if you're going to give youngsters a chance, if you're going to give Rory Whittaker a chance against St Mirren, if you're playing 16-year-olds in games like this, it's because you trust them. You're not going to trust them against one team but not another. And I think he's been brought on against Celtic and Rangers. There obviously isn't any fear in the coaching staff about him being overawed by the occasion. He's obviously played in that back four already on more than one occasion, which I think is useful. And he's maybe been sort of not rested, but he's not been involved as much recently as he was maybe before the international break. He was away with Scotland under 19s during the break. So obviously maybe one eye on his not sort of tiring him out. But yeah, I think Hibs have nothing to fear from starting Rory Whittaker at right back against Aberdeen. And I think, Monty has on occasion surprised us with a selection option or two, but I just think you've got a natural right back on the bench and you've trusted him before in big games. Why not do it again? And then that way you're not sort of, Will Fish went to right back against Dundee, but there's no guarantee that he's going to be able to put in the same sort of performance. It's not his natural position. You consider how much of how much of Hibs' style of play at the moment is sort of reliant on the centre backs taking the ball and building. The team is used to playing a certain way, and the centre backs are a big part of that. And I wouldn't personally be changing it for the sake of it. I think when you've got a natural right back, even if he's 16, you play him, you keep your natural centre halves in central defence, and if you need to change it around later, you've got the option to do that. Whether it's sort of like 60, 70 minutes in, but I mean, go back to what I was saying before. Montgomery does have form for pitching youngsters in and trusting them, and not just sort of giving them a token 5 or 10 minutes here or there. Actually relying on them to contribute, be part of the team. I mean, I looked at the number of teenagers that he sort of gave debuts to when he was at Central Coast Mariners, and it's a lot. It's more than you would expect. Can't remember the exact numbers, but and not just sort of 19-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds as well. So, I mean, Montgomery will speak to the media on Friday. I would very much doubt he'll give anything away in terms of team selection, but maybe he will. Maybe he'll break with tradition a little bit and tell us why Rory deserves to start. For me, it's the obvious one. With Lewis Miller being suspended, and yeah, like feel free, like get in touch with me on Twitter if I get this wrong, but I think Rory will get the nod. I think everything points to it. So yeah, I think that's the obvious thing to do. I know Nick Montgomery doesn't always do the obvious thing, but I think this time he will do.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a particularly outlandish prediction on this occasion. I think, and as you say, it would kind of fly in the face of what has come before in terms of being prepared to trust players, no matter what age they are or the kind of level of experience. So I think and it does make the most sense. You don't want to disrupt the back four any more than you have to. Especially against a team who obviously, it's been a very up and down season for Aberdeen, but they can, it's obvious that they can be a dangerous proposition. We'll obviously look at them in a bit more detail on the website later this week, but just in terms of, they are one of those teams where it's really become really difficult to know what you're going to get from them in terms of level of performance. I don't think they offer too many surprises, or they will offer too many surprises in the way they try to play. But it's one of those when you don't kind of know what Aberdeen is going to turn up. I think it's obviously been quite stark that at times this season that they've not particularly adapted too well to playing European football on the Thursday and then being back into domestic games on the Sunday. A couple of bad results off the back of that. I think it was when they lost to Kilmarnock away, which I remember watching a bit of that because that was before they played Hibs. It was a pretty kind of abject performance. And then they went to Celtic Park and got battered 6-0 after their last European game. But then they are capable of turning a performance like they did last weekend against Rangers, kind of seconds away from getting a really big victory there. So just in terms of knowing what Aberdeen are going to turn up it's pretty hard to predict. Maybe they're away in Helsinki for their penultimate European game, but it's I think they're already out. So I mean, they might take the chance to kind of rotate it as a bit of a dead rubber for them. So it might, the kind of European hangover effect might not be as great by the time they come to Easter Road. Who knows, is what I'm basically saying about Aberdeen. They're predictably unpredictable. You really don't know what you're going to get from them.
You were going to say that.
But just in terms, from a Hibs perspective, obviously, I'm kind of loath to go back to the semi-final and spend too much time talking about that. Because obviously, I mean, it was a kind of painful day in terms of the result for Hibs fans. But I mean, I think in terms of the actual performance on the day, just in kind of preparation for the weekend, been having a look, kind of back at what Hibs tried to do on that day. And I think it was actually, for me, it was actually one of their most productive days this season in terms of creating chances. They created a lot of good openings, did a lot of really good things. Again, I don't want to give too much away because we'll write about it in greater detail in the week. But I think there's, as painful as that game was, there's still kind of positives, I think, that can be taken from it and built into this game because, can I make no mistake about it, maybe league positions don't quite reflect it at the moment, but these are, two teams who are going to have, come, April, May, are going to have designs on being in and around that third spot. So it is a really big game, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think, not just for Montgomery, and I think we spoke previously about, different tests for him in Scottish football. So there was obviously the Edinburgh Derby, then there's playing Rangers at Ibrox, then there's playing Celtic, then there's a National Cup semi-final. I think this is a big test because they've obviously had the good results against Kilmarnock and Dundee. Two games I would say where they've won ugly, and that's something that they hadn't really been able to do beforehand. Like even when they beat St Johnstone in Montgomery's first home game in charge, when they beat St Mirren in the quarterfinals of the Viaplay, it wasn't a sort of skin of the teeth, grind out a result, backs to the wall, park the bus, whatever. There were good performances in there, maybe not quite as complete as what we've seen in recent weeks, but it wasn't. It wasn't sort of. You weren't sort of looking at it thinking, Hibs have really dug deep there to get that result. Mm-hmm. I think they've done that against Dundee and Kilmarnock. Two teams who, have been sort of difficult in the past, that they've drawn against in the past. Under Montgomery, obviously his first game in charge of the club away to Kilmarnock, and they were 2-0 up, and Killie pegged them back, got a 2-2 draw out of it, and then the Dundee game at Easter Road where Hibs kind of murdered them 0-0, if you like. It was, I think, save for Owen Beck, so a chance at the end that Marshall did really well to save. It was kind of one-way traffic for much of the game. And when you look at the result against Kilmarnock at Easter Road and you look at the result against Dundee at Dens, you can see the progress that's been made, not just in terms of how Montgomery's managing games, but in how the players are seeing games out, how they're responding to the coaching, and they've talked about it, but adapting for different situations, game management, just being a bit more savvy and thinking, what do we need to do to hold on here? I think, with Aberdeen, you don't want to sort of say, is it a chance for revenge? Because, I'm sure if we asked Nick Montgomery on Friday, is this a chance for revenge? He'd say you can't get revenge for losing a semi-final and not getting to a final.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gone.
He's right. It's just one of these things that us football journalists like to say, to try and get managers to speak. Is this a chance for revenge? And he said, no, this is a chance for a headline. So, it's obviously not about that. It's about being able to build on what we've seen previously, which is, sort of eking out hard-fought wins against two tricky teams, one at home, one away. And I think regardless of what Aberdeen do in Europe on Thursday night, regardless of who they play, regardless of how they play, you can only play what's in front of you. Sound like such a football manager here. It's true. And I think that, it's more about Hibs just continuing to play the way that they have been playing and, building on the good bits from the victories against Kilmarnock and Dundee, and, not sort of letting themselves be drawn into, another situation where, they play really well, but ultimately end up empty-handed. And, I think lessons will have been learned by the management team and the players from the game at Hampden. There's obviously, I think, a couple of players available this time who weren't available for that game. But, just in terms of, individually and collectively, I think Hibs have, they've progressed from Hampden. And I think it will be interesting to see how they cope with Aberdeen. You're right when you say that Aberdeen, they've almost taken over Hibs' mantle as the sort of most consistently inconsistent team in the Premiership, that, you don't actually know what you're going to get. If the good version turns up, then, it could be a really good result, or, in last weekend's case, very close to being a very good result. And if it's the bad one that turns up, it could be, an utterly honking display. And you're sort of thinking, hold on a minute, what's happened? That was last week. So I think it really does depend. It depends on how I think Aberdeen approach this game. But I think Hibs, Hibs can take confidence going into it from the way they played against Kilmarnock and the way they played against Dundee and the way they played against Dundee with 10 men as well. I think, that's important. But ultimately, it gives them a chance to show that, those two victories weren't, not one-offs, obviously, but, the victories weren't sort of, luck, or it wasn't by chance, and, it wasn't because the other team wasn't at the races, because certainly in the Kilmarnock game, same with the Dundee game, there was, a lot of kitchen sinks being thrown around in the last sort of 15 to 20 minutes. I don't think, players talk about, not fearing anyone, and Hibs players especially talk about being able to beat, being good enough to beat any team on their day. And I think, that's what it comes down to. If Hibs turn up and, they play the way that they did for, the bulk of the games against Kilmarnock and Dundee, learn from the mistakes they made against Aberdeen at Hampden, then, they should be confident of getting a positive result. And, I think it would again tell us, a bit more about, what we're getting from this Montgomery team and what he's getting out of the players, and how the players are kind of maturing and growing and just sort of continuing to adapt to, the way he wants them to play.
Yeah, I think the kind of focus needs to be at the moment is just building towards that kind of complete performance. I think we've seen bits and that and varying levels for varying amounts of time in games, but I think the one thing you really want to see from Hibs now is just building towards that one complete performance that obviously they'll be hoping brings the result along with it. Before we wrap it up year to date, obviously we heard, and you'll be able to read this in full on the website we have from Mick Montgomery, about Jake Doyle-Hayes, who's obviously had no understatement to say he's had just a completely miserable time with it of late. Injuries upon injuries, recurring injuries, just not been able to catch a break really. But it looks as though there might now be some light at the end of the tunnel for him.
Yeah, I think, almost, I think when I wrote the article, I sort of referred to him as Hibs' forgotten man, because I think, with Chris Cadden and Harry McCurdy, for varying reasons, they were sort of very prominent in, the sort of public eye. Cadden obviously playing a lot last season. McCurdy maybe, occasionally making the headlines for, not always the right reasons, but, obviously, such a sort of like character as himself, is going to attract attention, and there's going to be, a lot of hype around him when he first came. But I think with Doyle-Hayes, it's been a really rough sort of 16 to 18 months for him, just kind of stop start. Last season he obviously had that injury. I think it was at the end of September, start of October, that basically was caused by Lee Johnson during a training game, and he kept on training for a week, and then he's sort of feeling discomfort, so they get it checked out, and basically there's an existing injury that needs dealt with. I think it was a bit of bone floating in his ankle, which sounds absolutely horrendous. Something which Montgomery said he'd had in his career, which I think is useful in that he knows what Doyle-Hayes is going through, and he can maybe offer him advice on how to deal with it, and just sort of keep him, maybe try and keep him sort of like on a bit more of a positive keel. But I think even last season when he came back towards the end of the campaign, and there was a really good performance against Celtic at Celtic Park. Hibs did lose 3-1. Had Ellie Ewan sent off early on, but it was a really kind of feisty display from him. He was sort of snapping at Celtic's heels throughout his time on the pitch, and just seeing a bit of a different side to him. I thought actually, there is, he's offering something different here, and he was speaking as well and saying that there was he was being encouraged to be more kind of attacking, more forward thinking, and he'd been working with the coaching staff sort of after hours to sort of try and improve that side of his game. And then, the last game of the season against Hearts at Tynecastle, he, I think it was a dislocated shoulder he suffered, and you just thought, this guy can't catch a break. So then for him to come back and be involved in pre-season and, starting the first game of the season against St Mirren, you think, great, he's sort of got it sorted. And then obviously he's not, he's out of the team for a bit. He comes back, there's a couple of sub appearances, and then, there's nothing, and transpires he's had a recurrence of the same injury, this sort of ankle problem, and he has to undergo surgery for a second time. He's on crutches for a while, and you just, it's mentally it must be like just so exhausting. And I think Hibs fans obviously be a little bit concerned with another midfielder seemingly suffering from a string of injuries. Like Cal McGuinness obviously had rotten luck with injuries at Hibs, still having rotten luck with injuries. Now he's at Kilmarnock, and you can understand that sort of slight nervousness from the support that have we got a midfielder here who's not going to be able to contribute? But the suggestion from Montgomery is that after this sort of second surgery that Doyle-Hayes has undergone, his ankle's looking good. He's I think he's walking without crutches now, which is obviously a step forward. And the next step obviously is getting him back on the grass and building him up to being to being able to play games, then getting him minutes in bounce games, to get him match ready, because as we know, Montgomery and his coaching staff aren't going to rush anybody back. They're not going to risk anyone who isn't 100%. And certainly with Doyle-Hayes and what he's been through, you wouldn't want to risk him having another breakdown, or God forbid suffering another recurrence of the same injury. But it does look good, and I think on paper he does look like a really good option for one of those central midfield roles in the way that Montgomery likes to play. Whether or not it works, obviously remains to be seen. But at the moment, Hibs don't have a lot in central midfield. You've obviously got Joe Newell, you've got Dylan Levitt, you've got Jimmy Jeggo. Beyond that, you're looking at Orlando Ferrier, you're looking at the youngsters. To have Doyle-Hayes back and available, it gives you two players for both those central midfield positions, and it's so demanding in Montgomery's setup. You want so much from those two midfielders, just in terms of what they're being asked to do, how they're being asked to link with the centre backs, and just basically be the complete package in midfield. And I think from what I've seen of Doyle-Hayes so far, I think he'd be a really good fit for that. I think he would sort of feel himself that he's more than just a defensive midfielder. He has got that ability to play as as an 8, or certainly seemed like he was being asked to work on maybe not playing as an out and out 10, but just having a bit more focus on that attacking side of his game. I do think that you keep him fit, and then you've got 4 players who can play those positions. And for Montgomery, it's not about having 2 first choice players who can play 85, 90 minutes each week. It's about having players who can either play from the start or come on as a sub and make an impact. He seems very much to be the kind of manager who it's not, this is my starting 11 and then I'll bring on a few subs if boys start to get tired. This is the team I'm going to start with. These are the 5 boys who can come on and make a difference in midfield, in the final third, in defence, whatever. And I think that's, somebody was questioning today and saying, where does Doyle-Hayes fit into the team when you've got the likes of Levitt, Jeggo and Newell? But I think, you need a squad. You need to have players who are not only capable of, starting if needs be, because, we know Montgomery likes to rotate a little bit, but even in the event of injuries, you need players who can step in and essentially replicate what the guy they're replacing does, and not be a noticeable kind of drop in quality or in cohesion with like the rest of the team. And I think you see that when Dylan Levitt comes in for Jimmy Jeggo. You see it when Jair Tavares is starting instead of Eli Yuan. You see it when Martin Boyle's starting up front instead of Christian Deutsch for whatever, or when Josh Campbell comes in. It's all about having players who can come in and do it from the start or come off the bench and contribute. And I just think it will be. We talked before about getting Cadden and McCurdy back will, for Montgomery, be like having, a couple of new signings. And I think with Doyle-Hayes, it will be very much the same. I think he's, I just think he'd be a really good option to have in the current setup. I think he'd be more than capable of filling in for either of the 2 starters, or starting himself, in the event, like we say, of injury or Montgomery mixing it up. So yeah, I don't think we have a time frame on when he could be back available, but you would hope from the point of view of having a strong second half to the season that he'd be back early in the new year, and obviously the January transfer window, something we'll discuss in a later video. But I just think having players back who haven't featured so far will be such a boost to what I mean. We've said before, it's such a light squad at the moment. Like you are relying on teenagers to fill it, and they're there on merit. They're not there just to make up numbers. But just having, I think for Montgomery, having more of a decision to make in certain positions will be good for him, but also good for the players in terms of keeping them on their toes and really kind of encouraging them to sort of put in a little bit extra in training or whatever, just to really to make him think about what starting 11 he picks and what subs he picks.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Just if you joined us late, before we go, if I could just direct you one final time to our Black Friday sale, which you'll see kind of moving across the ticker at the bottom there. It's basically for £10 for a year, you get full access to every single bit of our Hibs content, ranging from videos like this, interviews and features, tactical analysis, and then in-depth preview and reaction, as well as live coverage on the day of every Hibs game. So if you're interested in that, if that sounds at all appealing, please do consider supporting us. We really appreciate everybody who's signed up so far. They've really blown away by the reaction to it, and we hope as many of you as possible can join us moving forward. But as for today, that's all from myself and Patrick. If you keep an eye on the Hibs Observer website, we'll be back over the next few days with all the build up to this Saturday's game against Aberdeen. Saturday, God, I was doing so well there. I was doing so well, no script or anything. Obviously don't listen to me. The game's on Sunday. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.